When it comes to Egypt, there are known mysteries, such as the star shafts in the Great Pyramid, and unknown mysteries, like the one I'm going to describe for you today. This is a very obscure site that involves a vast ancient underground tunnel that was partly uncovered in the last century and then inexplicably reburied and now totally ignored. People walk over or by it every day and have no idea that it's even there. The archaeological notes speak of finding the start of stone steps 75 feet underground and then just not digging any further. If you or I were digging a hole, found steps going downward to something, could any of us just stop and say, probably nothing there, and go on our way? Today I'm going to tell you the story of the Great Trench at Saqqara, a 1,500-foot, massive long structure carefully carved into solid bedrock, and yet today you cannot see it at all. This is truly a location without any parallel in Egypt. I am going to methodically explain everything that is known about the trench, from one end to the other, and what isn't known. Then I'm going to walk through several logical theories as to its use and see if they make sense or not. First, we need to understand a bit about the unique geology of Saqqara and how that fits into the trench mystery. Once you dig down through the sand that has accumulated there, you will find hard, firm limestone bedrock. This upper hard rock stratum is only a few feet thick. Below that, you will find a much softer layer of sedimentary rock that is easily dug out. This softer layer varies in thickness, but the whole slice of the Earth's crust I'm talking about is about 75-80 feet thick, about 25 meters thick. Below the soft rock, we once again hit a hard layer of limestone. This is what I will be calling the lower hard rock stratum. Below that second hard rock layer, we once again find the softer rock. Altogether, we have a nice sandwich of alternating hard and soft layers. The area of Saqqara I will be speaking about is this long and narrow strip at the bottom of the massive dry moat that surrounds the pyramid of Djoser. The first area here was excavated by Salim Hassan, and later sections by Zaki Saad from 1939 through the 1940s. The known dimensions of the trench in this area are 466 meters, or about 1,533 feet, but because excavation stopped without explanation, there is honestly no telling where the western end goes. The trench starts here, at the east end of the dry moat, another strange feature we will cover in a later video. The earliest dating for the trench would be the time the dry moat was completed, assumed to be the same time as the step pyramid was being built, but there really isn't any way to know for sure. We do know that it was not much later because of a very frustrating issue with examining this structure. You see, at some point the trench was filled in, and at least 12 later mastaba tombs were plunked down in a row right over it, filling up much of the dry moat. Personally, I feel the trench has the potential to tell us far more about ancient Egyptian engineering than the tombs on top, but no one is willing to remove them to fully excavate underneath. What we do have here is the intermittent excavation of the deep trench, starting and stopping when it runs under one of the tombs very inconveniently placed in its path. Before I jump fully into the details, let's orient ourselves in the massive sprawling Saqqara complex and take a look at what can be seen from the surface, and then we will go underground, and no matter what you are expecting, it should light your brain on fire like it did mine. Jumping into Street View on Google Maps, we can see that the general area of the Great Trench not covered by a mastaba is just sand and rock, no defining features. Partway down the path, we can look north and see a glimpse of later rock-cut tombs just peeking out of the upper hard rock stratum. This is the north edge of the dry moat. We are walking in the middle of the dry moat, and the trench is buried to our left. Much damage has been made to the profile of the dry moat in this area, but if you look hard enough, you can still see the general shape of it. A bit further down the path, we can look left and see a nice flat rock place and then a point where it juts out. This will be important to remember for future reference, and we will come back to it. The next point in which we can see a sign of the deep trench is just north of the Pyramid of Unas. The desert rock is cut and weathered, but jumps out sharply in contrast to the sand. It is unknown how far the trench stretches off into the desert, but in this one especially crisp satellite photo from November 8, 2009, I see a few interesting possibilities. If we keep on the exact same heading of 90 degrees, we will see a clear channel for the next 340 feet. Directly in front of us, we see this large area of ancient structures cut into the ground. To the left, we once again see a straight cut in the desert rock, which, if indicative of the trench, would have it take a bend to the south and then continue past the ruins. The trench at this location would be directly pointed at and in the middle of the vast rectangular walled structure in the desert named Gizar el-Madir, one of the 4 or 5 such massive rectangular walled structures in the Saqqara desert without clear function. I briefly mentioned Giza el-Madir in my video named The Incredible Hydraulic Lifting Machines of Ancient Egypt. I know this part is speculation, but if the trench did not take that southward bend and instead kept straight at 90 degrees, it would have hit the corner of Giza el-Madir and not the middle. Maybe the two are completely unrelated, but I found it striking. However, let's get out of the world of speculation and into the actual substance of the trench. I have kept you waiting long enough. The excavations were started by Salim Hassan in 1939 and carried forward by Zaki Saad during the early to late 1940s. Zaki Saad's book on his excavations has dozens of pages on ancient bones, jewelry, and other things he found, but only 2 pages on the trench with only a few pictures. Most of the information I'm using here was unpublished in his papers and photographs and then found and used in the research materials of Egyptologist Nabil Swelim in the 1980s and 90s. I am relying on this small group of sources because there are no others. Excavations start right here in front of this mastaba on the southeast corner of the dry moat. Instead of going by all the mastaba names with those complicated Egyptian names which are very hard for me to pronounce and very confusing, we are just going to rename the ones that are in the way of the trench mastaba A, B, C, etc., and the various sections of the trench compartments 1, 2, 3, etc. And yes, there are compartments. Compartment 1 was initially entered via this dirt ramp that sloped to the ground. On the left side are some very strange square shafts cut into the rock, square at the top with slots cut into the side facing the trench. In total, there are 10 of these square shafts described as, quote, very deep in the book. If such an imprecise measurement also frustrates you, know you are not alone. Casual and brief descriptions of incredibly important features are part of the source material limitations. Some of the shafts could have been used by later mastabas A and B because they closely resemble magazines used for storage goods for the afterlife. However, I have not seen those with slots in the side, and they are usually not very deep. At the bottom of the ramp is a very interesting rectangular door or window cut into the rock. This is where things get very interesting. Do you see this nice smooth wall around the door? Let your eyes sweep upward and tell you when they see something that does not belong. This jagged section of the rock juts out like an awning. Originally, the builders used that hard rock stratum we discussed earlier as a roof for this entire underground structure. Most of the trench we will discuss here was originally not a trench at all, but rather compartments underground strung together in a row via these connecting doors. In nearly every section of the trench, the rock roof either crumbled into the trench or was broken up at some point, turning the tunnel into a trench. We can tell that it was supposed to originally have a roof made out of rock because you can see where the hard rock layer juts over the trench. Seen as the rock above and below this layer is nicely carved flat into walls, the only thing that makes sense is that this was once a rock roof that then collapsed into the trench. Back in compartment 1, I want you to note that it was never excavated at the eastern end. The ramp of rubble here was used by the workers to get down to the trench and access it easily, but this means right here could be buried an ancient door to another compartment, or the flat wall marking the end of the structure altogether, or something else. Once again, I tell you, the half-finished nature of this excavation is deeply frustrating. I understand that I am an armchair archaeologist and that this was being excavated and funded during a world war, but surely it is worth going back now to take another look. The only modern-day excavation or investigation I could find was a geophysical survey of mostly the dry moat by a Polish team that showed some structures underground, depressions, in the eastern end of the dry moat. There was also a few minutes in a National Geographic documentary which dug in part of the trench, but that was focused on the much later rock-cut tombs farther down. The pictures here are a bit odd since they are multiple pictures spliced together, but the main thing to focus on is this bulging wall. The walls are narrow at the top, wider in the middle, and then gracefully come back to narrow. This may not be obvious when looking from above, but from the end, a barrel-shaped profile is clearly observable. It does not seem possible for this to be accidental, but I can also not figure out a functional reason for the walls to be cut like this unless it was a feature of the varying rock stratum hardness and it just worked out that way, although I don't think that's probable. Drop a comment if you think you have a good idea for a functional or engineering reason to make the walls here bulge out in the middle. Back to the trench, moving through the door in the rock, we enter compartment 2 and meet some strange new features. Here are a couple pictures of compartment 2 from the top during the excavation. You can see here that much of that upper hard rock roof is intact, meaning that, like we mentioned before, these were originally mostly closed off compartments connected via a tunnel rock window. This also means that these chambers were cut end to end, underground, in the dark, through these tunnel windows from one direction or the other. To give a sense of the scale we are dealing with here, this section of rock between compartments 2 and 3 is 5 meters or roughly 16 feet thick. Moving through this tunnel, we enter compartment 3, a chamber cut like the others but much smaller due to being barely excavated. The reason it was barely excavated brings us to a short discussion of the priorities of work for this archaeological excavation. The Egyptian Department of Antiquities had first tasked Swelim Hassan and then Zaki Saad with excavating this vast section south of the Step Pyramid all the way down to the Pyramid of Unas. It is clear from reading the excavation reports that the Egyptologists were focused on and mostly interested in the mastabas. From a purely rational perspective, this makes sense. The burial goods, jewelry, historical treasures, and texts were all to be found in the mastabas. This trench was not a top priority, but probably an annoyance, as yard after yard of excavation revealed no funerary function. This short sentence is all that is dedicated to discussing the Great Trench in Saad's preliminary report from 1940. He had just spent pages discussing some necklaces and tomb decorations, and dropped this in as a teaser that what he was excavating resembled the entrance to a pyramid. I am not going to say if he was right or wrong to have his focus elsewhere, but it is good to know why, when it came to either excavating the trench fully, if that meant damage to a mastaba, the compartment was left filled in under the mastaba. Tunneling underneath would be dangerous, and there was no option at the time to do the work without removing the mastaba completely. However frustrating this is for us now, at least we have the reason why it wasn't fully excavated. Even if Saad had wanted to remove the mastabas and excavate the trench fully, it is doubtful if the government would have allowed him to do so. That is why Compartment 3 was basically unexcavated. From the door of Compartment 3, looking west, is the area archaeologists call the Western and Eastern Filling, also known as the part of this very unique trench that was skipped due to mastabas sitting on top of it. Therefore, we are forced to fast forward along the trench to the next section that was excavated, leaving this giant part containing who knows what unexplored. Compartment 4 is also known as the Great Compartment. The Great Compartment is 262 feet or 80 meters long and by far the largest yet. As excavations uncovered the trench, it was found to be 25 meters or 82 feet below the lower hard rock stratum and 9 meters or about 30 feet wide. These are approximately the same depth and width of previously excavated trenches, but shifted downward by one level of rock. Let me show you what I mean. Compartments 1 to 3 were set between these two layers of rock. The rock layer that was the floor for compartments 1 to 3 is now the roof of the Great Compartment. There was a level change in this area of the trench that was never excavated, and I will explain what I think this could mean later on in the video. The extra space at the upper section of the Great Compartment that was obtained by going deeper has a new feature in the way of this small niche cut into the wall above the rock roof. In this compartment, we only find a single niche, but there are many more in the next compartment. The Great Compartment has no tunnel on the western end like we previously saw, but it does have something far stranger. I am going to read you verbatim from the 1940 work of Zaki Saad. Quote, "To the southeast of the mastaba of Queen Nebet, we came upon a very big descent cut in the rock. At a depth of 25 meters from the ground level, we reached steps leading westward. It resembles very much the descent leading to the south mastaba of Zoshir. We were obliged to stop work in this place until next season." In short, we found the top of some stone steps at the bottom of this really crazy trench that led straight into the ground, and so we stopped digging for the season. I know there had to have been issues on such a project during the African campaign of World War II, but even if it was just me and a shovel, I can't imagine I would even be able to go to bed that night, let alone leave the country. I do believe I'd be out there dusk and dawn with pick and spade trying to find out where those stairs went. As far as I know, stairs mean that people used to walk there, meaning that this wasn't just some water tank meant to be filled up and then people never went in it. The rock windows are another matter we'll work through later, but stairs mean people, so I just have such a hard time understanding why they didn't keep going. Perhaps there was a very good reason. Perhaps he was forbidden. Perhaps someone else dug it up later and stole some treasure. We will never know, because I could not find a single future excavation report from Zaki Saad that ever mentions the stairs again. I hope one day to be able to locate and find the notes and photographs from the Zaki Saad archive. I know they exist because there are some academic papers on the subject that mention unpublished photographs of the deep trench. So maybe one day, if the Egyptian authorities smile on my research efforts, I may be able to fill in some of the gaps in this video. In November of 1942, Zaki Saad was back looking at the end of the trench, and his excavation reports evidently caught the attention of King Farouk of Egypt. The king had showed great interest in the previous season's report, which had mentioned the stairs. The implication by Zaki for the stairs was that they may lead to a tomb. However, instead of picking up his work where the stairs were, he went westward of the location, something absolutely inexplicable to me. We are now in the final known compartment, Compartment 5, although there are certainly more compartments that are sitting just below the surface that no one seems to have bothered to excavate in the last 90 years. This compartment also operated at level 3, meaning that the lower stratum of hard rock was its roof, just like Compartment 4, and a level lower than Compartments 1 to 3. The rock roof for this compartment had an opening cut in it during antiquity. We know this because right here you can see the nice cut lines showing the edge of an opening. The rock is jagged on all other sides, so either the hole was there initially or was cut there later at some ancient time. There is no way to tell which, but either there was an opening here or at another point to give initial access to the tunnel system, since you can't hollow it out if you don't have a hole. Unlike the other compartments, which had relatively flat bottoms, Compartment 5 had an extremely chaotic floor surface. This was due to two things. When excavators reached the bottom of the trench, they found it covered with a stone and mortar pavement. It seems to me that the floor must have been paved because they had gone through the hard rock stratum and needed a solid surface, but that is just a guess. In several places, they dug up this pavement to see if the trench continued, but it did not. The places where they dug downwards are indicated here. Then, in other places at the bottom, masses of masonry are piled up and create bumps. It almost seems as if there was some sort of structure built with stone and mortar at the bottom. No indication was found of a tunnel or connection back east toward the great compartment. Near the top of this trench are some niches, like I mentioned in Compartment 4. This trench has 13 of them, evenly spaced apart in 2 rows. The top row has 10 niches, and then there is a shorter row of 3 below them. The niches are cut into only one side of the trench walls near the top and have a flattish bottom and semicircular top. Since the niches are on the south wall of the trench, we know this image was taken from the west, pointed east back toward the portions we've already discussed. If the niches were opposite each other, it would be very easy to suggest they supported some sort of beam or scaffolding, but they are not opposite each other. Furthermore, at least 10 of them are above the lower rock surface, meaning they would have been just a few feet above the solid surface in ancient times. The pictures are not clear enough and not taken at an angle that shows the 3 smaller niches lower down very well, but the excavation note says that they are 9 meters below the 10 niches, so I judged that the 3 niches would be below the rock roof and separated from the 10 niches by it. This trench gives us a lot of new data to ponder, and the most glaring is this stone wall blocking up the trench. The rough stonework here was part of the foundation of a tomb and judged by Zaki Saad to be later work, although still ancient. However, this stonework here was of a much finer quality and judged to be older. I do not have any more information about the logic behind these statements to be able to question them further. However, I see a few reasons why this area would have been blocked up. 1. It was originally an entrance or exit to another compartment further west. 2. The stone for this section of wall was of poor quality, and no tunnel is behind the stone, and the block work is simply being placed there to keep the rock roof supported. 3. It was blocked up either to keep something unwanted out, groundwater seepage perhaps, or to keep something inside the trench from spilling out in that direction. 4. It is blocked up as part of decommissioning. This final one makes no sense to me because the other stone tunnels were not blocked up farther down. I also think there has to be more tunnel westward of this stonework, possibly accessible from another shaft from above that was cut later, or from stairs below the chaotic floor which haven't been found. The final thing in this image I want everyone to see is what I call the elephant's foot. The entire time I had been looking at these trench pictures, I couldn't help developing a massive case of pareidolia, where I looked at how the rock bulged out at the juncture of the rock roof. To me, it looked just like an elephant's foot with its toes pointing toward the trench. This, I believe, is the strongest evidence that the rock roof was initially meant to stay in place and collapse later. They first cut down until they got to the hard rock, then they cut across it and left it thicker there for strength. Then they cut a shaft into the rock and started cutting left and right into a tunnel in either direction. Like I said before, I cannot say which end of the tunnel they start at or which compartment was cut first, There's just too much unexcavated material to say that. However, this would be generally true unless some point further down is the location in which the rock could be cut directly into from a horizontal face. If we step back and look at everything here as one massive structure with multiple chambers and try and keep track of all the levels, we have a subterranean structure at a size and depth far greater than anything else in ancient Egypt. At the same depth would be the southern tomb of Saqqara, the internal shafts of the step pyramid, the pyramid of Sekhmet, and the deeper cuts at Zayet el-Arayan. This marks a strong contrast between the subterranean galleries of the royal tombs of the Second Dynasty, which were tunneled below the upper hard rock stratum, or by digging shallow trenches and roofing them with limestone blocks, as seen in the galleries of King Hotep-Shweme. What is perhaps most surprising and shocking about the excavation of the trench and why it wasn't completed is that the idea that all these compartments were connected did not present itself to the archaeologists at the time. In each location, the square edges of the shaft look like they could be the start to an early dynasty tomb, such as these. The Egyptologists would excitedly dig down looking for the trench to turn from a vertical one to a horizontal one. When Zaki Saad found the steps, remember, he thought he had come upon a tomb. Nowhere is documented the realization that instead of being individual compartments, beyond compartments 1 to 3, which were obviously linked, it was one massive structure. 1,345 feet, 410 meters long, stretching from one end of the dry moat of the step pyramid to the other. The dry moats and the walls of Saqqara are directly related to this mystery, as I touched on in the beginning of my video. I will be making a full investigative video of the massive walls and dry moat at Saqqara, but in this video it is important to show you how the Great Trench is a feature inside of the southern portion of the dry moat. Let's zoom out from our focus here in the trench and look at this broader section from above. If you want to do this for yourself and follow along, I would suggest you go to Google Earth, not maps, and go to historical imagery. Scroll back to November 8th, 2009. Look at how crisp and clear the contrast on that day is compared to now. The satellite angle casts just enough shadow that we can start to define the structure of the dry moat and where the trench fits in. The dry moat is this section here, a 200-foot wide cut into the rock. It wraps the whole way around the step pyramid of Djoser, and the Great Trench is an added feature within the southern wall of the moat. So the southern wall of the Great Trench is usually higher than the northern wall because of the moat starting somewhere here after compartment 3. Therefore, the moat was dug first, and then on the southern edge of the moat, a further section was tunneled under the rock, creating the first compartments with a rock roof. Let's look at each compartment as a cross-section of the moat. As you can see for compartments 1 to 3, the floor of the moat is also the same as the upper hard rock stratum layer. The southern wall is ruined or completely obscured by mastabas all piled up here. When we move over to compartment 4, the Great Compartment, we now have the profile of the dry moat as a structure above the trench. That same profile continues at the final compartment with all the niches. If all the sand in this picture left of this line was moved, the floor of the moat could be seen. So in summary, this rock channel was cut in the southern side of the moat's rock floor. The uppermost roof of the tunnel, now the trench, was the floor of the moat. At least one access point to the bottom of the moat would have been cut in compartment 5. There are stairs some 80 feet below the surface going somewhere even deeper that was never followed up on, and today the entire trench is filled back in and pretty much forgotten. I'm not kidding when I say I've looked at these same sets of pictures of the trench nearly every day for the last 4 months, trying to piece together what was going on here. I am not someone who blindly throws out conclusions and theories without evidence, and when I'm making a hypothesis or guess, I will also tell you. I believe part of the solution will be looking at the trench as part of the overall dry moat. Removing for the moment any speculation about what is in the unexcavated sections, I would like to consider the functional parts of the structure, and consider if they were originally meant for humans to enter on a regular basis or not at all. The only thing here that seems hospitable to human feet are the stairs going down. If, for example, like I said before, these are some sort of water-holding tanks, you'd expect the stairs to be up here, at the top, like most open pool-type wells we see around the world. That way you go down to where the water is nice and cool at the bottom of the pool, the narrow slit in depth keeping the water cooler and more sheltered from the sun as it passes overhead. However, having stairs starting 80 feet below the rock roof just doesn't fit that model. In compartments 1 to 3, we do have rock tunnels connecting each chamber, but they are high off the floor. To move from one chamber to the next would require a ladder to go up to chamber 2, down to chamber 3, another to go up, another to go down, and so forth. Not an impossible task, but rather cumbersome and clunky without specific reason. One theory that was proposed for this trench was water filtration via particles settling out as they came from one compartment to the next. The only place where this could possibly work is that chambers 1 to 3 were for water, 4 to 5 were for something else, since there is no rock in the tunnel wall for water to flow westward from either 4 or 5. This would also imply a far longer canal over to the Nile, although perhaps yearly flooding used to reach the trench and fill it on a yearly basis. However, the fact that compartments 1 to 3 are underneath the dry moat means if they are filled with water, then the moat was also not dry and therefore would also have filled with water, making these clean settling filtration tanks underneath them impractical. Since we are working with half the puzzle pieces here, I believe it would be dishonest for me to tell you I have figured this out. My job here, as I see it, is not to tell you we know nothing, but also not to tell you we know everything. The middle of the road is a lonely place, but I enjoy it. The only thing I can do is tell you that I plan to keep investigating this and add in the other facts about the dry moat in future videos. As you can see from my last couple videos, we are slowly building a concrete picture of the subterranean infrastructure at Saqqara, and we still have a lot to get through. Perhaps when the underground is mapped as well as the above ground, we will start to get a better idea of the overall engineering of this remarkable site. As always, thank you so much for watching.